Hello.
Oh, okay, I can hear you now. How are you?
I'm doing great.
All right. Hey, Leo.
Hi, Eric.
Chris, what JSC are you in?
11:59.
1159. Okay.
It was a great group. Um, we've all, well, we all kind of went off, and then a couple of us just stayed, kept the regular meeting. Another gentleman who's generally my age. And so it was great just to sort of push each other and talk.
Yeah.
Sadly, now a couple have come back. One who got a job turned out to be not a fit, she said.
Oh,
Next week, she's going to start joining again. And another one who thought she had something was going to go away. And then, so it's funny how things go, but it's a great group of people. And even, I mean, I'm hopefully knock on wood going to be full up with consulting, which is really what I want to do moving forward. So I'm not really on the hunt, but I love to
okay.
get in touch with them, help when I can, and vice versa. And even this, I like to sort of stay in tune with what's going on out there.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. There's a lot of folks that are transitioning their careers into fractional and consulting work. And sounds like, is this something that's new for you? Relatively new?
No, I've been doing it for over 20 years,
Oh, right on.
off and
Okay.
on. So
Okay.
I've worked at companies for many years, and then I would do consulting back in the good old days when it was just called marketing consulting.
Okay.
So it's only recent I added fractional. Somebody said, add fractional. Like,
It's a new buzzword, right?
yeah, you got to put that out there. But yeah, I've seen an awful lot of people. In fact, in the NSA on the
Yeah.
Slack and such, who are really wanting to get into it and looking at that as an alternative. So and I've had discussions with a number of folks just trying to help them. Well, here's what I did and how I've done it over many years.
Have you heard of Fractionals United?
Yes.
Okay, are you part of that community?
Yeah. Fractional United. What is it? So yeah.
It's an interesting, I mean, I think it feels like it's becoming more of a prevalent career path. When folks are struggling, even if they're not struggling to find their next full-time position, they're orienting themselves for more of fractional consulting work. And then I've seen some where they just kind of got into it, inadvertently, and then it just took off. They just started getting more and more clients, becoming known for a particular niche, and they've sort of built a personal, professional brand around that
Yep.
niche. And so it seems like it's sort of a becoming more of a prevalent career path.
Yeah, I'll say two things on that, Eric. One, when I talk to people and they're sort of like, yeah, I think I want to like, doesn't mean you can't continue going down the other path of looking, for a
Yeah,
full-time employment and all that good stuff.
yeah,
But explore this path also. And, there are pros and cons for sure, big time. But you might find that it might be more of a fit to what you really enjoy. And the other thing I've heard, I don't know if this is true. We actually, in our group call this morning, we're talking about it. While there have been lots of layoffs, and marketing always gets just really hit when layoffs spreads tech and elsewhere,
yeah,
marketing gets, bashed pretty big. But it doesn't mean all the needs and requirements go away and projects and such. And I've been hearing that there is a lot more consulting, fractional consulting work
yeah.
opportunities out there. I'm literally, I don't know for sure until probably Tuesday, but I may have to start turning things down because there's only so many hours I can work a week.
Yeah.
And I'm hearing some positive signs from other people too.
Okay. Yeah, we might have to take this offline. I'd love to chat with you a little
Yep.
bit more about sort of this because we're orienting ourselves so we can kind of service some of these folks in helping them develop more business. So,
Yep.
hi everyone. Allison, Clara, George, we have a good group here. Karen, Shayna, Stephen, Swapnil. Would love to see your faces if you're open to it. Turning your video on. Hi there, Karen. Um, cool. Thanks for joining us today here. Um, I don't have a formal program today. I think part of it was just to just do our AMA and then also if there are any questions or anything that y'all want to talk about from last week's discussion around sort of games that recruiters play. If there's any sort of strange experiences you are experiencing now with a recruiter, or maybe have in the past, and you're like, oh, is this some sort of game? How should I interpret this? I'm happy, we can kind of explore that, um, in the first half of this call. Um, so I'm happy to do that. We can kind of, see what we can make out of it. As a recap from last week, I had a formal informal deck where we talked about some patterns or games that recruiters might play. And a lot of times candidates don't might not understand what to make of it or what might be happening behind the scenes. And so we kind of went through a few of them. I had a deck. Actually, I could share this deck. I had a deck of like, I don't know, like 20 different sort of patterns or um, sort of games. Um, and so we only got through like four or five of them, I think. But does anyone have any thoughts or questions on that? Otherwise, we could just jump right into sort of general AMA stuff. I just popped the link, by the way, into the chat, the Zoom chat there. If you guys want to take a look at that.
Hi, Eric. I have two questions.
Yeah, Karen.
Yeah, one question is based on my own experience, all the recruiter just ghosted after I send out my resume to them,
Yeah,
or like, so I don't know what's behind the scene. So my second question is about like I have an ex-colleague who just built a very long-term relationship with a fantastic recruiter. Actually, as far as I know, that recruiter just helped her to land three upcoming dream jobs in her career. But that recruiter was located in China, Shanghai, and even so I cannot reach out to her again because I'm now in the US. So my second question is how to build up a long-term relationship with a qualified or with an
yeah,
outstanding recruiter. So it looks like all
yeah,
the recruiter as far in my contact in my networks, they are all short term that they just ghosted
yeah,
eventually, and I
yeah,
cannot
yeah.
connect
So
them again.
hopefully I can shed a little bit of light on this. It's pretty common questions. I mean, your first question about ghosting, it seems to be a little bit more prevalent nowadays than maybe it was, I don't know, a few years ago. And I think it has to do with a few things. And again, this is I don't know exactly what the case is specifically with your case, right? But what might be happening, generally speaking, is that recruiters tend to be inundated right now. You have recruiters that are doing the work of two, three, four, five recruiters, and so they're inundated. They have more work than they can handle. And number two, there's an abundance of great talent out there, and so when a job is posted, they're getting inundated with a lot of resumes, a lot of applications, and so a large part of their job is trying to find the best candidates among those stacks of resumes. Um, and so I think the going expectation now is if you apply for a position and you don't hear back, like just in my own terminology, I don't necessarily call that ghosting. You'll probably get an email at some point, even if it's just a rejection email. Um, but when I think of ghosting, it's you have a great conversation or meaningful conversation with a recruiter, and they lead you to believe that there will be some sort of next step. Like even if it's just a yeah, they're moving forward with other candidates, right? They lead you to believe that there would be some form of next step, and then you hear nothing from them, even after you proactively try to inquire via email or via phone call. That's what I call ghosting, and I think it's just completely bad form. Um, you know, and it's, candidates, actually anybody, like anybody, not just candidates, but any professional courtesy would warrant just some sort of response, right? And so, again, I don't know what might be happening with your particular case. Um, to answer your second question, I think with respect to building relationships with recruiters, you have to look for, first of all, you have to find and try to identify the right recruiter, right? And this has to do with industry, with level, with region, right? With even maybe domain or industry sort of segmentation. And once you find the ideal recruiter that sort of aligns with your career, kind of where you want to go, is building a relationship with them. I would start with maybe engaging with some of their content offline or online, but and then you know, reaching out to them and trying to demonstrate some sort of value to them, right? And recruiters are incentivized by different things. Well, internal recruiters are incentivized by different things than external recruiters. And so if you understand kind of what they're incentivized by, as an example, external recruiters tend to be incentivized by making a very quick placement because often their commission is tied to that. So the faster if they can cut down their placement rate or placement time in half, they're effectively doubling their commission or their revenue. And so, to the extent that you can help them navigate to find the right candidates, um, that's helpful, right? And so, things like that. A lot of recruiters like a platform as well, especially if they're a full desk recruiter, meaning that they're in charge of soliciting new business, new requisitions, new clients. So if they have a platform where they can promote their services, their firm, their personal brand, a lot of them like that as well. So a platform could be like, an invitation to be on a podcast, an invitation to speak on a panel, right? So those are some quick examples. So hopefully that helps, Karen.
It
Uh,
helps. Uh, could you mention, like you mentioned the external recruiter, what about the internal recruiter? Are they would be incentivized by different reason or factors?
I mean, part of their incentives is to obviously make the placement
Uh,
because that's what they're paid to
got
do.
it.
Um,
Mhm.
but they also they're incentivized to promote the brand of the particular company. That's one thing, right? So if you can give them a platform to promote the brand of the company, um, that's important. Um, I would say they're probably a little bit less incentivized to fill something quickly because oftentimes their commissions or their bonus structure is less influenced by that. A lot of internal recruiters are paid, a base, and they might have some incremental bonus for every placement they make, but it's not as dramatic as an external recruiter. External recruiters, their commissions are much higher per placement, and so they tend to be more monetarily driven and more they have external recruiters tend to have a higher sense of urgency about closing deals. Um, that's the tendency, especially if you start going into higher volume recruiting. Executive search and retained search recruiters, they're incentivized and they're external, right? Well, you can have internal executive search recruiters, but generally speaking, they're incentivized to get the search right, whether they're internal or external, because the cost of replacement, the cost of mishire is it's so high at the executive level, right? So hopefully that adds a little bit more color.
Thank you.
Of
Thank
course.
you so much. It's very insightful.
You're welcome, Karen. Um, okay, well, unless anyone has any other questions around this deck, happy to just, take any other questions. Oh, by the way, so there's this question board that I have. I'll pop it into the chat here. Um, let's see, nine. That's the code. So if you want to drop any questions into there or upvote any questions, feel free. But and then obviously if you have any questions, just holler. But otherwise I'll just pick questions off this board here. Are you guys able to get into that board? Did that work? Yeah, okay, cool. Let's see. So how do I increase the number of opportunities that I make? that I make it to at least a recruiter screen for. Most applications don't get reviewed, and getting referrals is extremely tedious and very slow. Recruiters aren't reaching out. Um, yeah, so I'll preface this. Like again, what I strive to do in these sessions, right, is, my background's in recruiting. Been doing this for 11 years or so, mostly at the venture capital backed tech startup and growth companies stage. Um, so I'll try to give you guys my perspective as a recruiter. Right? I don't claim to have all the answers or any necessarily silver bullets here, but my goal is to give you guys um, sort of my perspective as a recruiter. So, right now it's a situation where there's just an abundance of great talent out there competing for a limited set of opportunities. And so, if you want to increase the number of opportunities, what I would suggest is one is developing relationship with recruiters. That can be tedious and it can take time, but think of it as sort of a long burn and a long-term investment in terms of these relationships. And I would say even once you find a position, that you maintain those relationships with the recruiters. Set it on your calendar to, I don't know, ping them once a quarter or once every 6 months just to check in and say hi. And you can even ask them, what trends are they seeing in the marketplace, um, and such, right? So that benefits you as you look to navigate and manage your own career, but also as you start to get into positions where you're hiring and starting to build your team, right? You want to keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on out there, um, and how you would build a team, right? And then, when you want to build a team too, you'll have some relationship with some recruiters that may be able to help you when the time comes to hire. So that'd be one, right? Focusing on building a longer term relationship with the right recruiters. I guess in the short term, you know, I don't know that there's any sort of silver magic bullet other than being just being a great candidate. And I know that, yeah, I don't know if that's just sort of a cop out of an answer, but to the extent that you can be a great candidate and you can market yourself in a focused and effective way, then recruiters will find you, right? And when you're starting to meet them halfway in terms of applying and such, recruiters will start to look at your online presence, your LinkedIn profile, obviously your resume, and they'll start to see what a great fit you would be for them. But in order for you to do that, like, you have to be focused. You have to, I mean, I would imagine most of you are all going through this process now largely with the NSA, and you are refining your candidate market fit. You're writing a great resume. You're focusing. You have an understanding of what the market need is for your particular position, and you're really sort of hyper personalizing your experience for the particular positions. I know it's a lot of work, and I assume that you guys are doing that. Um, but really, just being a great candidate, right? And it doesn't just stop with the things on paper or online. It's also, well, I guess the question here has to do with just making it to the recruiter screen. But yeah, I mean, downstream, like, it's just being the kind of person that you'd want to work with, right? Um, but as far as just, I mean, this question here, making it at least at the recruiter screen, um, yeah, there's a bunch of things that you would need to do, right? You'd have to optimize your resume, do some keyword optimization. Don't spend too much time on that. You have to you apply through the front, through the front door as far as applications, but also look for the side door entrances. And then I would say also, to the extent you have a hyper focused and a really crisp and tight candidate market fit statement, that helps other folks in your network work on your behalf more effectively, right? So those are a few things I would just mention there. I see that 4 people upvoted this. Any follow-on questions or thoughts or ideas? Maybe stuff that I might have missed. Yes, Sepide?
Yeah, hi, my name is Sepida. There are two things I like to talk about. First of them, the building relationship that you mentioned on the listening tours and before having the candid market fit. My experience was through LinkedIn. I approached a lot of the recruiters in my industry and I sent them a message. They accepted my invite originally. Some of them read my message and I was like, hi. I didn't honestly don't know how to best approach and mention without just asking them, hey, can we sit together 30 minutes to talk? It's a stranger you talk about. How can I find your interest in my interest?
Yeah.
And say, hey, how can I help you? You help me because I just need your help. And I don't know how to talk to a stranger recruiter that
Yeah. Yeah.
didn't have that connection. So do you have any recommendations on what would you not like to see in someone's questions?
Yeah. So I'll share
I
with you
didn't get
what
any responses, and I think they didn't like my questions. But
um I'll share with you what I see, right? And I think I would say it's probably typical for most recruiters. So I get a lot of in LinkedIn connection requests. Um, and sometimes people write something, sometimes they don't. When they do write something, um, it's usually to the effect of can I have a few minutes of your time, right? And so that's very common. That's very common. And what I'm suggesting is that if you can take it up a notch from what everybody's doing to something that most people aren't doing, hopefully that gives you sort of a baseline there. Because the question the recruiter's asking is like, why should I spend time with you? Like everybody's pulling me every which way. Like I have 5 hiring managers, each with 3 requisitions, maybe, that I'm working on, and I'm struggling here. Like so, the recruiters, if you get in their mindset, right, they're incentivized to fill a position, right? And so one way that you can help them is by understanding the opportunity that they're recruiting for quite, very deeply, and then sort of mapping how you align with that, and doing that in a way that is easy to consume, um, and almost making like an elevator pitch for yourself, right? And if you could do that in a way that is genuine and is concise, I get a lot of emails. You guys probably get this as well, right? I can imagine there's a lot of folks that are pitching services on LinkedIn, and you know the the one the ones that I'm least likely to engage with are the ones that are like two or three, like even 1, 2, or 3 paragraphs, right? I think if you approach someone like a recruiter with a conversational message, meaning a short message, maybe it's a statement coupled with a question, and that's it. Almost like you're texting your friend, right? You wouldn't send your friend a giant pitch about all the services your company provides and this and that, and right, you wouldn't do that. So to the extent that, and it's not consumable, right? When somebody sees that on their phone, at least for me, I kind of ignore it. I look at it really quickly, I scan it, and then I know that it's not for me, right? But if they were to just be like, hey, I see this is a trend, what are you seeing? Well, if you just if you make some sort of statement and then ask a question, I would likely to engage, even if it's just a yes or a no, or, this is what I'm seeing, right? Like I'd be likely to engage. And once you get some engagement, it's that much easier to get more engagement, right? It's, how do they say, like, you get the small yeses to the big yes kind of thing, right? So when you're reaching out to folks, it's a little bit of an art, right? And you have to think about, put yourself in their shoes. And some of you probably are, right? You're probably getting all these spammy pitches for different vendors on LinkedIn, right? And so which ones are you most apt to look at? Which ones are you most apt to respond to? I would make it quite short. Um, I don't know if you guys spend any time on like LinkedIn or looking at the feed or Facebook, but like some of these articles or posts that people post that are uh, that yield a lot of engagement, a lot of likes or a lot of comments. There's a formula to this, by the way. Um, they have a very hooky uh, first line, right? And so if you can learn from that, maybe analyze that. I mean, just chat GPT it. There's patterns for this, and chat GPT will tell you what the patterns are. You can emulate that in your outreach. So again, from a recruiter's perspective, I would definitely not send a paragraph. 1 or 2 sentences, 2 sentences at the most, often with a question, but not just a basic question, some thought-provoking, hooky question. and get them to engage, right? And so that would be my thought. Again, this is based on what I see and what I respond to. Um, and so hopefully that's helpful, Stephanie.
Yeah, thank you. It was really helpful.
Let's see, Allison, would you, as an internal recruiter, appreciate it if someone reaches out to you and says, "Are there any recs I can help you fill?" Thinking about additional ways to provide value. Um, yeah, my initial reaction to that would be yes. But my thought would be that the next taking it to the next level would be ideal, right? What I mean by the next level is anticipating their needs or their questions, right? So instead of saying, so like maybe level one is like, oh, are there any recs I can help you fill? The response is obviously yes. Go to the website. You can see all the recs that I'm trying to fill here. So if you just take it to this next level and just go to their website or whatever, oh, and then I saw, this and this requisition, you know, I have a few strong colleagues in my network. Would an introduction be valuable to you? Something like that, right? So it's taking it from one level to the next, right? So most people will say, let me know if there's anything I can help you with, right? It's a little bit generic. I mean, it signals good intentions, right? But it's a little bit generic and it's a little bit level one. But if you take it to the next level, which is, well, I see that you're working on this, I would imagine that you might need help in this area. I have this resource or this or that that can help you with that. So you're taking it from one level to the next, right? So you're minimizing the cognitive effort on their part, and you're coming with some assumptions about the problems or challenges that they're facing, but you're also coupling that with some solutions, right? And so, and if in fact your assumption about their challenges or problems are correct, then I would think that you would get a higher engagement of them sort of entertaining a conversation with you about the solutions that you might have to offer. Let's see. Shayna, do you think that writing long paragraphs doesn't make sense as an initiation even with a hiring manager? Apologies, this isn't recruiter centric. Is writing less more in general? Curious to know about this. I would say yes. I would say yes. Less is more because I think what you're trying to do is you're trying to get engagement. And once somebody responds to you, they're likely to respond in a second message. There's a higher probability that they'll respond to you in the second message, right? You want to minimize the friction of them having to think too much, right? I mean, just look at how people consume communications these days. Most often it's on the phone, oftentimes it's on the toilet, right? And so people are just on the go and like they 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 get a dopamine hit if they can answer a quick question, right? But to read a big paragraph and to think about that and to answer each question in a single response back, there's less of a dopamine hit for that, right? Because it's too much effort. It's like reading a real book versus, reading, some clickbaity post, right? Most people want to just read a quick clickbaity post and kind of be on their way, right? For what it's worth. So, I mean, just my personal experience, what I've seen, I think if you engage with something that would get them to respond, um, then you're in a much better place to start going deeper. So I think less is more, generally speaking. And yes, I think that applies to hiring managers too, because hiring managers are people too, and they're just as busy. They're as busy as recruiters, but they might not be getting hit up as much as recruiters. It's hard to say, right? Because sometimes hiring managers are a little bit more elusive in terms of connecting the job opening with who the hiring authority is, whereas, recruiters have, a big target, right? They have recruiter for XYZ company, and so oftentimes it's a little bit easier to find the recruiter than it is the hiring manager. But regardless, I think engaging them with more conversational kinds of messaging is likely to be more effective. Similarly, when you're texting someone, a lot of times you're not saying, "Dear Mr. So and so" or "Mrs. So and so." and writing it like an email or letter structure, right? It's more quick conversation. So if you signal even subconsciously or subliminally that this is just a conversation versus some real formal messaging, you're likely to get more engagement, I think. So, but test it out. I mean, love to hear from others to see kind of what's worked for them. Karen, thank you for jumping in here. Hope to see you next time. Uh, oh, hey, Stephen.
Yeah, I've got a question.
Yeah.
So, I have really been not getting any responses from recruiters, and I've tried messaging on LinkedIn. I've tried calling, tried emailing, left voicemails. And my situation is I'm trying to make a career change and get my first position in a new, yeah, in a new career. And I only succeeded in getting a single recruiter on the line. And she said that she's like, her take was that I'm not even really being looked at or considered because I don't have multiple years of demonstrated experience in these roles.
Yeah.
And it didn't seem to matter that I had a portfolio and I have projects that in my mind is like kind of evidence that I have it,
Yeah.
like have the skills. Um, I'm just kind of curious on your take and if this is like a temporary market. So, the tech market is, in a certain kind of place. And I'm trying to pivot into data analytics or data science, which I think is getting some of the software engineer, like the peripheral market stresses. I'm just kind of curious if you have any thoughts and if you think this is like a me problem or a market macro
Yeah, that's
thing.
the that is the ultimate question. Is it a me problem or a some external market, what have you, economic cycle problem? How can I answer this? And there's a few things that's going on here, right? Is one is, making a career pivot right now is tough. Finding a job even in your line of your current career trajectory is tough right now. Um, Making a pivot right now with respect to the folks that are looking at evaluating you as a candidate and your resume, from their mindset, it's an additional risk, right? Um, Recruiters they want to minimize risk for themselves and for their team, for their hiring team, for their company, and minimizing and going with someone that is pivoting, even if a great case is to be made, it does slightly increase the risk, right? It increases the risk on behalf of the recruiter because now they have to make a case because the hiring manager will look at that at the person will be like, oh, well, they haven't been doing this for X amount of time or whatnot. And the recruiter has to defend it or make a case for, yes, but so to the extent that you can help them make that case, assuming they're open to it, right? Because some recruiters would just be like, no, it's too much risk. I mean, they might not tell you this to your face, but that's what they're thinking. It's like it's just too much risk. It's too much work for me. I'd have to go out of my way and sort of make a case, right? And then I might get shot down by the hiring manager or the team. Whereas if I just deliver what they're looking for per the spec and per what they've described to me, then it's safer. It's higher probability for me that I won't have to defend anything. So assuming that they are open to it, you just have to help them make the case on your behalf. Because then the obvious question is, and you just mentioned one of them, right? Is like, I might not check the box on this requirement. But then how do you rebut that? It's like, but I have this experience or I have this or I have that. And so having that conversation with the recruiter, once you've won them over and they're convinced that they can or they're willing to make a case on your behalf, then it's like, okay, well, how do you help them make that case? Because you have to have that case already, right? And I would recommend going into it, imagining what questions or concerns they may have about your candidacy and being able to have those answers at the ready, right? Because those are the questions that the hiring manager is going to ask the recruiter. The recruiter is just preemptively asking these questions. And to the extent that the recruiter can have those questions answered, then they can go to the hiring manager and feel confident in making a case on your behalf. So you have to get out ahead of it. and know what questions they're going to be asking and what concerns that they're going to be having, right? You look at the folks that are vying for those positions that you're going after, right? And the folks that you're competing with, like what does their background look like? Because when they look at your resume, your background, they they'll have certain questions and you want to be able to answer that.
Yeah. And I've tried to preemptively answer some of that in cover letters, but I feel like they're not even really being looked at.
You're not
If
looking at it. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, cover letter is a whole other thing, right? I mean, I'll give you my take. As a recruiter, I've been conditioned not to read them because
Mm.
they're very they tend to be very generic, right? And so and maybe that'll change as time goes on and maybe more people maybe the people will be um increasing the level of customization or personalization. And but in a lot of at least from what I'm seeing, most companies I've worked with, they're just not even interested in cover letters. They're not requiring them as part of the application process. So, um, let's see.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I'm just looking at the questions here. Thanks, Stephen. Are JDs generally created by recruiters or by hiring managers? Do we need to tailor our answers completely to the JD or consider taking a broad-based view on what's a safe option? That's a great question, Shannon. So, in my experience, it's sort of a mixed, right? Sometimes so my experience is mostly as an external recruiter. So a lot of times I'll come in and depending on the situation, I might work with the hiring team to develop the job description from scratch, right? In some cases, they may have a job description, and I may use that as a starting point of conversation and discovery to refine the ultimate job description. So it could be written, generally speaking, by recruiter plus hiring manager, or just the hiring manager. It's an interesting question, and I mean, that would be a legitimate question for a recruiter when you're talking with them, is asking them if they wrote the job description. The answer to that question will be telling because if they say that they wrote the job description, that would signal that they have they're uh, higher proximity, closer proximity to the hiring manager, which is important. You know, if you're looking and if you're evaluating the recruiter that you're working with, ideally you want a recruiter that has line of sight to the hiring manager, and not just line of sight, they have influence with the hiring manager. In other words, they have the hiring manager's ear. Ideally, they're the recruiter, the exclusive recruiter that has the hiring manager's ear, right? So that could be a legitimate question to ask a recruiter. Did you write this job description? Or was it the hiring manager? Or they may say, yeah, I wrote the job description, or I worked with the hiring manager. Or they may just say, oh no, it was just given to me, right? So then from that, you can kind of get a feel for how close are they to the hiring manager. Because ideally, you're working with a recruiter that's closer to the hiring manager, right? And to the to the uh, to the to the question you had earlier, Stephen, um, uh, about whether to, sorry, I lost my train of thought here. Um, you want to work with a recruiter that has closer proximity to the hiring manager. And so if you can kind of feel out the recruiter and kind of get a sense of that's important, right? So if you're trying to work with a recruiter that has limited line of sight to a hiring manager, as somebody that's making a career pivot, it's probably less likely that they're gonna go out of their way to make a case for you. And even if they did, they probably have limited influence, right? And you contrast that against a recruiter that has line of sight, that worked with the hiring manager in putting the job description together, right? They probably have much more influence, and you'll probably have a higher probability of having a meaningful conversation and working with that recruiter to make a compelling case to that hiring manager, right? So, so yeah, it's a good question. And yeah, don't be afraid to follow up and ask the recruiter, like, is this templated job description, or is this something that was you worked with the hiring manager? And you can get some really meaningful insights there. Um, I would suggest tailoring your answers to the job description. And nowadays with ChatGPT, it's quite easy to do that. What I would suggest is, and so here's one thing I would suggest, and please, if anybody takes me up on this idea, I would love to hear from you and how this has worked. I would recommend either doing a mock interview and recording it, or telling your own story and recording it, just do it on Zoom or whatever, record it and transcribe it. So basically, one thing you can do is you just walk through your resume and imagine all the questions that they may ask about each bullet point, sort of the CAR method, right? The challenge, action, result, and, maybe the learning, and just talk to the recording as if you're interviewing with someone and tell the story. Transcribe that, and now you have a lot of detail that you can use to tease out narratives, tease out the three compelling stories that you want to have dialed when you go into a resume, when you go into an interview. And it's my thought that if you have three solid stories that you know inside and out, you can adapt that story to virtually any question to give concrete examples, right? And so if you just have two or three solid stories, right, you can adapt that. And so I'm really curious if anyone's interested in doing this. I'm happy to kind of share with you how you might do this, because I've done this with a few folks already. And you create from those transcriptions, you can create a knowledge base that you can tie into like a custom chat GPT, and you can tease all kinds of artifacts out of that, like a resume, create a bullet point. It's amazing. So anyway, so I kind of digress here, but the point is, I think, with respect to your question, Shane, I think if you tailor your answers to the job description, it would be much more customized. And I think most people are doing that now already because ChatGPT makes it so easy to do that. I would highly recommend doing that. Sepide, what are the first three things recruiters check on someone's resume to bring them for an interview? I'll tell you what I look at, right? And I'll just throw this out roughly based, just sort of off the cuff. I look at their city if they have it. If they're not in the same city or state, uh, again, depending on the requirements, I deprioritize them. I look at where they're currently working. I scan through where they're currently working or where they have worked. And depending on the position, I draw some assumptions or insights based on the companies that they've worked with. So if they have a bunch of big company names, and I'm hiring for a startup, my question, and not necessarily ruling them out, but my question is, why go from these large companies to a small startup, right? I look at tenure. How long have they been? How long have they been at the companies they've worked with? I look at how if there's any gaps in their resume. Sorry, time gaps, right? I look at I scan down to the bottom for like extracurriculars or just any personal stuff. This becomes it helps me remember the person, right? So you have to put yourself in the mindset of a recruiter. Recruiters are working with people all day. They're looking at resumes all the time. So a lot of times, I won't say this, all recruiters do this, but what I do is I tend to try to look for something that's kind of sticky or helps me remember the person. It could be anything, right? Like maybe it's some obscure hobby that they have, right? Or whatnot. So I look for those things. It also becomes fodder for like just conversation, right? When I end up talking with them, if I end up talking with them. Um, let's see. So I look for title progression, right? So I'm kind of imagining that along a curve, right? Is their titles continually going, the breadth of their scope of their titles and responsibilities, is it continually going up? Or did it go up sharply at the beginning of their career and then kind of plateaued? Or did it make some sort of shift? Or did they move into some higher level position and then sort of go back down to like, go back down? Did they move into like, maybe from a management position into an individual contributor position? So that sort of arc is interesting. And again, I'm sort of in my mind trying to align that with what my understanding of the job requirements, right, in the team. Um, and then I'll scan, and again, this is initial scan, right? And then I'll look at a few of the bullet points, and just kind of see what they're talking about, right? So it gives me a gauge of, are they data oriented? Are they accomplishment oriented? So those are a few of the things that I look for, I scan for an initial resume review. Let's see, some larger enterprises are using this for initial screening, but can you also use this in practice? Mock interviews. Okay. I would highly recommend mock interviews. I don't think people do it enough. It's especially now, like you can record your own. It's so easy to record yourself and send the recording to friends or people and give them feedback. And you have tools like this, Talently. Um, I think there's just not enough people that do this. So, and maybe there's a self-conscious thing going on, which I'm kind of self-conscious too. Like I don't like hearing my voice on recordings. Um, but I think there's a lot of valuable information you can squeeze out of doing something like this. Let's see. I'd be interested in doing the transcript and recording actually. Okay. Shayna, yeah, feel free to email me. Happy to kind of talk through this with you. Um, where can you put those odd hobbies on LinkedIn or on a resume? For example, I hula hoop, but not sure if I can put that. I love that. If I saw that, Michelle, on a resume, uh, I'd be like, oh, this is interesting. Like, assuming that, you had the requisites uh, experience for the role, like just it's like, oh, I'm so curious. Like, tell me about hula hooping. What would be better, right, is if you won some obscure hula hooping contest, right? Or you've set some sort of record for hula hooping. That would be really unique, right? You'd be easy to remember, right? So but yeah, to answer your question, where can you put that? I mean, usually I see that at the bottom of a resume under, I don't know, extracurricular or personal, right? You know, uh, one thing about adding sort of extracurriculars, and I think I just kind of mentioned this, but instead of saying you love cooking, I mean, a lot of people love cooking, but instead of just saying, oh, I love cooking or cooking, use ChatGPT to come up with some sort of obscure or way to describe what you love about cooking. Like maybe it's just some obscure niche of cooking that you like that really sets you apart from the average person that's just putting cooking, right? Liven it up a bit. I mean, don't be afraid to you know, express yourself a little bit on the resume. So that's one thing that I don't see enough of, right? So, and it stands out. And when you, again, thinking about the mindset of a recruiter that's just scanning through resumes all the time, I'm looking for an entertaining pattern interrupt, right? And when I see a pattern interrupt, it brings a little ounce of joy to my mundane hour of scanning through resumes, right? So when I see something like hula hooping, oh, that's interesting, you know? So yeah, again, just to kind of throw that out there and give you a little bit of this perspective of who might be reading your resume. Um, let's see. Generally, I've been mostly advised to keep the extracurriculars off. Is that not the case then? Shayna, I want to make this very clear. Like, there's no one way of doing a resume, right? There's no one way. And I think if you were to do a resume for the book, it would be so freaking boring and like it would not, I mean, to my point about the pattern interrupt, it was not going to get anybody's attention, right? Because it's by the book, right? Who likes reading a textbook, right? It's so there's no one way to write a resume, right? And you have to kind of go with, a resume is an expression of your experience, but to some degree, it can also be an expression of your own personality, right? And I've seen some extreme ones, which, if you go too extreme, it's like, again, you have to sort of think about the risk there, right? Or the risk that the recruiter and the hiring manager might be managing. You want to stick out, but you don't want to stick out too much. Let me put it that way, right? And that same goes with sort of cultural fit or cultural ad, as a lot of people like to call it, cultural ad. You want to align with the culture, but not so much that there's nothing unique about you. At the same time, you don't want to stick out or deviate from the culture so much that it's a risk. It's a potential liability, right? For a hiring manager to hire someone that is they don't resemble at all, the current team, right? And I'm not talking like skin color or that. I'm just talking about like experience or interest or things like that, right? So it's sort of that art of finding that balance of sticking out, but how much do you stick out? So same thing with a resume, right? You want it to be catchy, but you don't want it to be gimmicky either, right? So that's what I would have to say about that. Love startups at pre-seed stage, and usually I participate while I hold a regular job. You participate, Victor, are you participating as an employee? Do you have multiple jobs, or are you doing like part-time?
Yeah,
Uh,
so I participate, after regular hours. So
yeah,
during regular hours, I have a regular job, and then in the evenings and weekends, I do hackathons or, all that stuff. Yeah,
yeah,
waiting for something to work. But
yeah,
in
yeah,
the resume, I I'm not sure whether to put that because usually it's that the timelines do not work out. They're shown as like duplicate or, well,
yeah,
not duplicate, but at the same time.
yeah. So I would be careful with this because, showing your passion for startups and extracurricular projects, it can, on the positive side, it could signal that you are dedicated to your craft, right? I mean, after work, assuming you're like you say you're a developer, after work, you're still developing, right? Right? Like that's how you relax because you just love it that much. And so to the extent that you can convey that, I think that's valuable. And that's how I would look at it as a recruiter. But you have to be cautious because you also start to encroach on that possibility that, oh, is this person like moonlighting? And are they going to be distracted by these other startups that they're working on? Am I going to have their full commitment? Right? That's sort of the question that comes up. The other thing too is that it does become confusing depending on how you present it on your resume, right? So if you have under your work experience like multiple concurrent jobs and they're kind of like overlapping, that could be super confusing. Now, if I saw a contractor next to these positions or fractional or part-time, then that makes sense, which actually raises a good point. To the extent that you can answer, even if just a little bit, the question that may come up in your resume, um, it will be received much better. So, for example, if you have a gap, right, or maybe let's say maybe you left a company within a few months, right, having a quick explanation of why would be highly valuable. So, for example, contractor, 3-month contract, right, or a company had a riff, or they weren't able to secure the next round of funding, or something like that, right? Um, Anything like that would help sort of neutralize the question mark slash um, maybe negative strike in the reader's mind, right? So to the extent that you can address that, like right then and there, it would be helpful. And you don't have to, it doesn't have to be a long, lengthy explanation, but just something that alludes to, I have an explanation for this, right? And that you're acknowledging it. You're almost bringing it up, right? So that would be helpful. Sorry, I was digressing again. Um, but yeah, so as far as you know, what I would do if I were you is you may be able to put that into a projects section, um, and separate it out as something that you've worked on, you're working on. But just be sensitive to that concern of, the concern or the question about your level of commitment, right? Um, so I hope that helps, Stephen.
Thank
Or
you.
yeah. Okay. Let's see. Let's see, Allison, where would you put the info that you've been laid off? LinkedIn at the top of the experience section. Um, so the one comment that, I mean, my initial comment on this is that layoffs are quite common right now. So not necessarily, and so you're in good company. And it's not something that I don't think you have to worry too much about with respect to like stigma or anything like that. Um, but as far as, mentioning that you have been laid off, I think it would be more important mentioning that if, if there was a short stint, right? And what I mean by short stint is if, maybe less than 18 months, right? If you were there for less than 18 months, I would, in my mind, relatively speaking, that's a shorter stint, right? And so if you have a shorter stint, then it'd be worth explaining like, oh, you were part of a riff, right? And so I mean on your resume you could just put you just put parentheses riff next to the duration or next to the time that you were there, right? Um, I would appreciate that as a recruiter because sometimes I jump to conclusions, and if I see a short stint, I presume it was the person decided to leave. I presume that they decided to leave to pursue something else, or maybe they were, they were pushed out, or maybe they just, yeah. But if you were part of a larger riff that was, largely out of your control, it'd be worthwhile for me as a recruiter to know that, or to have some sort of indicator that was likely the reason that you left. And as far as where you can put that on LinkedIn, I mean, again, if your duration at the last company was short, it may be worthwhile putting that in, into the about section, or even, in the work experience section for that particular company. Okay. Um, just seeing here. Are there any other questions you guys want to cover? I think we covered a lot of ground today. No? All right. Well, we'll wrap it up here. I appreciate you guys joining. You're welcome, Allison. Um, I will see you guys all next week, and reach out if I can help with anything, but hopefully this is all helpful. All right. Thank you all. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.